Welcome, everybody. This is our fourth Real Debate, and I'm delighted to welcome Dan Brunton. Dan, very welcome.
Thank you very much indeed. Nice to be with you.
So I'm not going to steal your thunder in terms of what you're all about, but I read with great interest your heritage as a publisher and a great sportsman as well. And I believe you're into horses as well, somewhat.
Yes, a bit of a mixed sort of background, really. So I'm actually the fifth generation of my family in publishing. It actually started off in my mother's side of the family, so the Binstead family, back in the 1890s, very much focusing on the beverage and wine industry. And it was in the 1950s, so not long after the Second World War, when my great-grandfather was sort of wandering around a vineyard and saw they'd actually started using these sort of funny paper partitions because there was obviously a shortage of wood while they were rebuilding after the war. And he sort of asked the vineyard owner, he said, well, you know, what's that? And the guy said, oh, it's corrugated cardboard. And being the entrepreneur that they were, he said, well, there must be an industry for that. So they started a magazine, and so you know, 60 something odd years later, and here we are publishing magazines about the global corrugated industry and folding carton industry. So that's my heritage.
Started with cardboard divs. Cardboard divs. Would you believe it? Still going strong, I believe.
So yes, it's it's had me traveling around the world, which is fantastic. And I've even managed to sort of you know, when I've been traveling around with work, also sort of get in a bit of my sort of passions and hobbies, which as you've alluded to, a bit of horse racing. My father and I have bred a few horses over the years, had good success with them. About 25 kilos ago, I was a GB representative at triathlon, went to the World Championships in 2010, 11 and 12. So juggled all of that around side of, along, full-time job and a family and everything else. So that's sort of what keeps me out of trouble.
How many children have you got?
Got two, 17-year-old son, and he is an avid sportsman. Went to his school on a sports scholarship, which was great. And then my daughter, who is 15 and fortunately takes after her mother, and is very much into the sort of photographic industry. So she's studying photography at A-levels, which is wonderful, because my wife's a professional photographer as well. So keeping things in the family.
What sort of photography does your wife do?
She does all sorts, really. She started off very much doing sort of newborn and family portraiture. She then expanded a little bit into what's known as boudoir photography, and she's now starting to try and get more into commercial photography, because she said that commercial photography is a little bit more, it's easier to handle because, a client gives you a brief, you take a photo of a product, job done. Whereas when you do sort of families and you're doing portraiture, it's very much, well, can you airbrush out the spots, and can you, my teeth aren't quite straight and they're not white enough. And she's an award-winning photographer, but she said now's the time to get into commercial. So that's where she's at.
So in terms of the travel, where have you, what's the most far-flung place and most interesting place you've traveled to?
I've been very lucky with the packaging industry, publishing job that I've got. I've visited box plants pretty much on every continent. I've been very, very lucky, and, seen some great places. We were in India, not last year, year before, in September, and that was the Indian Corrugated Packaging Association event that, they invited me to come along. And it just so happened to be our 20th wedding anniversary. So I thought, yeah, let's tack on a week at the end. So, yeah, managed to do the Golden Triangle and, sort of Taj Mahal. And, but, I think what's fascinating about this particular job and where we get to travel in the world, it's fascinating because effectively you're seeing a process in different countries of the world, and they all think they're reinventing the wheel, but of course they're not. So the technology, the corrugators, the printing machinery, the die cutters, the gluers, etc. But it is funny when sometimes, particularly with family businesses, they sort of think that they've really broken into something new, and it's quite difficult not to blow the wind out of their sails by saying, yeah.
where would you say on the planet is as the most technically advanced when it comes to printing, die cutting, gluing, and all those sort of quite complicated finishing?
So packaging production in general, I would probably say Europe. Yeah. Europe, I think, leads the way. The American market, traditionally there was always a bit of a lag because of the way that the tax systems worked in America. That if you bought a $10 million corrugator, it would take you a very long time to write that down. So what happened in the States was they would tend to have older equipment because they had to run it for longer before they could actually get the benefit from it. So very long return on investments, and so the Europeans on the flip side have a very short write down period. 3 years they're able to write down equipment, and it tends to mean that what we see particularly in the packaging industry is the turnover of equipment seems to be more regular. So if you're buying a corrugator, you probably run that for probably 10 to 12 years and then replace it with a new one. The Flexo printing equipment would be probably 5 or 6 years. Die cutting and folding and gluing every sort of probably 3 or 4 years. And it's only literally in the last 5, maybe 10 years that America has started to properly catch up. Now, the other interesting thing that's really happened is the Europeans seem to have led the way in terms of equipment development as well. So now, obviously, there are American manufacturers, of course there are. But there's been an awful lot of consolidation in the North American OEM, original equipment manufacturing market. So the Europeans certainly lead the charge both in machinery making and also the actual use of the equipment. The only one outside of that probably is is the fly in the ointment would be Japan. Japan, obviously, very, very sophisticated box plants. The Japanese really were the ones who, and I know it's something you want to talk about a little bit later, in terms of robotics and automating plants. But the Japanese were very much instigators of how can you get more through these machines with fewer people. So when you look at the likes of Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, they're not the prettiest looking machines by any means. So aesthetically, they're nothing to look at, but the volume that they produce is mind blowing. So yeah, I would say that probably the European packaging market would be slightly ahead of North America. Japan wouldn't be far away. But then, of course, we've got the whole of the sort of the emerging markets of, it sounds bizarre saying emerging, but, China as a manufacturer of higher quality packaging is getting better and better every year.
Because they're making the high-end consumer products for people like Samsung and for people like Apple, etc.
Yeah, they are. That's right. That's right. And so, and of course, what's happened with the big brands, and it doesn't matter whether we're talking food or whether you're talking, electronics. The brands are now very aware of the global, branding message, and so therefore the packs that the foods or the electronics are being shipped in, they now have to be standardized right across the world. So I think over the coming probably next 3 to 5 years, you will see that because if you go back 10, 15 years, you bought a 6-pack of Coke here in the UK, and it would look slightly different from the pack that you would buy in India, or different from the pack that you would buy in China or America. Now what's happening is I think a lot of the brands are starting to standardize their packaging, and to achieve that, they are now saying, right, you must print it on a Bob's Masterflex, or you've got to print it on a Gotfoot, or they are starting to stipulate, if we're producing it one way in one territory, it must be the same across all territories.
And I hear retailers like IKEA are now specifying and even buying corrugated board directly, and then outsourcing the conversion to third parties, and even converting it themselves in some
cases. Yes. So that's actually not anything particularly new. Some of the companies that are manufacturing low-cost sort of furniture, flat-pack furniture, they've often invested in what we call right-sized equipment. So they're buying long sheets of corrugated board, and then they're trimming or cutting them to the size for the materials that are going inside. And yeah, I mean, IKEA is or IKEA is, as they call it over in Scandinavia. They actually speak quite a lot at the international corrugated conferences, because they've actually, obviously being Scandinavian, it's very much about forestry and the sustainability. They're actually starting to do away with quite a lot of the wood within the packaging process, because obviously even inside cardboard boxes, sometimes you get strips of wood to give it the rigidity. So they've done away with all of that. They're also doing away with all the polystyrene corners that they would put in for protectors. And they're stipulating that you have to use cardboard or corrugated board protectors on the ends. So they're saying, no, we want every aspect of the packaging to be paper-based. So yeah, it takes big brands like that to really enhance and embrace the sustainability, because I think it's one aspect that's been probably overlooked a little bit during the last year, during lockdown, is sustainability. Sustainability is sort of it was always the #1 objective for us as consumers, but also for the brands. And I think it kind of slipped down the order a little bit. But yeah, the latest round of sort of raw materials and the price increases, which again we're going to talk about in a minute, I think that's pushed sustainability back up the batting order, which is good for our industry.
I know technology is close to your heart, and particularly digital, and there have been seismic changes in the world of digital printing particularly, and the challenges with large format and using inks that are water-based as opposed to fossil-based. Where do you see that going? Do you think that we will have the perfect scenario of large format, very fast, sustainable, and consistent? Do you think we'll have that within a matter of 2 or 3 years, perhaps?
It's a really interesting question, and it's actually quite difficult to nail down, because I think if we look at the folding carton market, where one would argue that the digital printing technology has been around much longer, because if you think the transition from labels, which converted to digital about 15-20 years ago, folding cartons started to embrace it 15 years ago, and digital print on corrugated packaging is relatively, still a newcomer, and has been talked about, quite vigorously for about the last 8-10 years. The thing that I find really interesting is why the industries have not taken the technology on faster. Now, I think one of the issues that we've got within the paper-based packaging industry is that we are traditionally very conservative. We're relatively slow to change. We are, at some levels, we are resistant to change. And until there can be a seismic shift in that sort of mentality and that culture, new technologies are going to struggle to become mainstream. Now, if we now focus on the sort of corrugated packaging side for digital printing, the sort of transition from what we call the multi-pass machines, so effectively the board moves along and then the head does this, or the board does that, and under a static head, that has now transitioned to proper sort of single pass technology. And those machines are sort of printing on boards from 1.3 to 1.8 meters in width. They're producing anywhere from 1,500 to 3,000 sheets an hour. But of course, that compares, or doesn't compare to the Flexo machines, which are running at 12,000 an hour. So, there's this massive disparity in terms of the sort of production capabilities. Now, obviously, there has been then a change. Those early single pass presses were using UV inks, which you alluded to earlier, that obviously those, they can be recycled, but it's quite a difficult recycling process. But in the last 2 to 3 years, there have been several manufacturers who have now come to the fore with true water-based inks. Obviously, that needs a change in the ink head, the inkjet head technology, which is successfully being rolled out now. But I think one of the areas that's holding people back is there's still this massive disparity from the cost of Flexo water-based inks. So you're looking at sort of maybe €5 per kilo for a standard Flexo ink. Digital is 5 to 6 times more expensive. Okay, so on the one hand, you've got raw material, the ink, which is sort of 25 to 30 euros a kilo, and you can only produce 3,000 sheets an hour. You can understand why there's been a sort of rearguard action from the traditional Flexo and litho press manufacturers to say, no, we're actually going to enhance our technology so that we remain competitive. So it's an interesting quandary, but I certainly think that within the next 5 to 10 years, I think the majority of box plants or packaging converting facilities will have some form of digital print capability within their factory.
And maybe a combination of perhaps Flexo and digital within the process. Yeah. Now, just keeping on the subject of technology, and technologies, I'm a big fan of anything that drives change through technology. Robotics and AI. I've been around corrugated box plants and carton plants in recent years, and I don't see an awful lot of what I call true automation compared to, say, the way Tesla, for example, will, 3/4 of the manufacturing process is run by robots. Why are we not seeing more robotic investment in the production of packaging at the moment?
It's quite interesting. The new high-speed equipment, particularly when we talk about what we call a case maker. So it's taking a flat sheet of board, it's printing it, it's die cutting, it's folding and gluing all in one line. Those machines are able to run at anywhere from 18 to 25,000 pieces an hour. To get the most out of those machines, you have to put decent robotic handling systems on there. And so it has been interesting to see the development of robotics within the packaging industry. But when you then look at the less sophisticated equipment, we still utilize what we call pre-feeders, palletizers, etc., that are effectively taking big bundles of board and shoving them into the machines. But you've still got operators there, okay? Because one of the issues with with paper and board is that it's still a semi-natural product. You can't guarantee that. Yeah, exactly. With the it might be warped, so you've got to have someone to actually turn the bundles, etc. So there is an element of the human eye still needs to be involved, because it's not like in the Tesla factory you can set up a robot to pick up something that is a predefined shape. That has no deviation at all, will be in the right place at the right time. And of course, with board, even when you're moving stacks of board around a factory, any amount of wobble and suddenly the angle of the pallet load might be slightly off center. So how do you handle that? Well, again, this comes down to the materials handling systems. And of course, yes, I think the factory of the future, and the industry's been talking about it for probably 3 or 4 years. We're talking about dark warehouses. Well, I think if you're producing standard, brown cardboard boxes printed in one color, very low levels of sophistication of the print, etc. So in other words, you're a volume producer. Maybe the dark warehouse and the dark environment might work. But I think if you're starting to talk about lots of intricate pieces and designs and high quality printing, you still need people, even though there are all the inspection tools and the high speed cameras that can check for registration of the print, the barcodes, etc., etc. All of that's coming along. But the machines, I think, still need operators. So I don't think we'll see a plant with 3 people in it. Well, certainly not in my lifetime.
I suppose, there's been some seismic changes, haven't there? Macro changes, BREXIT, COVID. They've all had interesting impacts on supply chains. Let's talk a bit about that. What have been the sort of primary impacts on the packaging industry as far as COVID, for example? How have they responded to this sudden leap in demand for e-com packaging, for example?
Well, so let's look at the human aspect and then the supply chain aspect. I think obviously right from day one, it was great reaction from the likes of FEFCO, the European Trade Federation for the corrugated industry, ECMAR, Pro Carton. They lobbied very, very hard in those opening weeks as Europe started to lock down, saying that packaging actually is a critical supply chain product. So therefore, we were classed as essential industry. So it meant that the converters were able to continue, but obviously at a more local level, having spoken to an awful lot of box plants over the last 12 months, it was noticeable that they were worried about if someone's ill or they have to self-isolate. There were some instances where a whole shift would just disappear. Because 10 operators, 3 of them have been working side by side, one of them's got COVID, bang, you've got to shut them down, and you can lose them for 14 days. And then of course there were all of the schemes like furlough, which in fairness, the majority of packaging companies, they didn't jump into furlough because they realized, well, particularly if you were in packaging production for food, pharmaceuticals, e-commerce, they realized quite quickly that their sort of levels were going to stay pretty solid. But it was the guys who were in sort of luxury packaging and industrial packaging that probably felt the pinch. But
food service, of course, has had a huge hit.
Yeah, but I think so. You know, what was the impact on the converters? I think they had the issues of loss of staff, and of course that then meant that they were overstretching the other employees. So that's when you then get, because they're tired, they then injure themselves, and then you've lost yet another player. And of course, with the combination of, particularly in the UK, with Brexit looming, there were large swathes of sort of Eastern European type operators who were coming to the UK, good jobs, skilled, in the art of manufacturing, for packaging. And of course, with all the Brexit stuff, they were just like, right, sling your hook, we're back off to Poland, off to Lithuania, etc. And so the corrugated industry lost quite a lot of skilled labor. So you've got that double whammy of COVID, and you lose operators, and then Brexit, you also lose operators. So, when we start looking at what's going on in terms of, the packaging within the supply chain, I think COVID and Brexit are almost like a perfect storm. I mean, it is just, it's had profound impact. And you can see this because of the rabid nature of what's happening with paper supply. Literally, we're hearing horror stories that, guys, so sheet plants, so people who are just running printing and converting equipment, who buy in their board from sheet feeders, they're being pushed out to 8 weeks lead time. Usually it's 7 days.
Yeah,
it's going from 7 days to 8 weeks. And some people are saying, oh, well, it's all because of e-commerce. I don't think it is just e-commerce, because e-commerce has been growing at double-digit growth for the last 5 years. Okay, e-commerce is here to stay. And when you look at even the UK corrugated industry showed a plus 1.7, 1.8% growth in 2020 against the economy that is saying it shrank by 8%. So the packaging industry is pretty resilient, but it's under huge amounts of pressure at the moment. So we've got escalating paper prices. Paper prices went up. Bearing in mind, they didn't move once in 2020. They went up by a decent slug in January, the middle of January. 2.5 weeks later, they had another decent slug. And then on the virgin papers, they're all chuntering away saying, yeah, we're going to go on the 1st of March. So, and yet you're looking at it and saying, so you're putting the prices up, okay, and you're extending our lead times, which means that we are basically leaving our customers in the crap. I mean, I've heard, some awful stories of, expecting to deliver packaging the next day, and literally it's being delivered 2 weeks later.
Yeah, we've had glass.
That's not an ideal situation.
We have a won't go into specifics, but they pack a fresh product, and sometimes 24 hours notice. This is not a product you can, once it's out, you got to pack it. That's it. There's no way back, and they can't get their corrugated. So there's wastage. Yeah. So price increase is inevitable. Do you think that the market will stabilize anytime soon? And if so, when?
That's it. Yeah, it's the old crystal ball gazing at the moment. There's some interesting factors at play, because some commentators will say, well, last year we had the best part of 1 million tons worth of new capacity come on stream in Europe. But then you have to say, yeah, but is that theoretical capacity or actual production? Because they're two totally different things. The big issue that we've got at the moment is the fact that there is not enough what we call OCC, old corrugated cases, which is what's used to go back into the paper system, pulp it, repulp, and make into either recycled carton boards or recycled container board. The issue that we've got is, as a society, yes, we understand, as consumers, we understand the importance of recycling. But the reality is that we're ordering more online and all of these Amazon boxes arrive. Okay, and what do? We sit on it, and we sit on it for probably 2 weeks until the blue top bin gets recycled at the curbside. Whereas when you compare to how we usually operate, so in other words, the majority of OCC is collected at the supermarket. Okay, so all of the waste processors, the recycled paper merchants that are going around and collecting from Tesco's and Aldi and Waitrose, etc., the volume of corrugated cases there is not as much as it used to be. So there's this massive pressure on the paper producers. They're just saying, we haven't got enough raw material to make back into the paper that you want to make into boxes. It was actually Miles Roberts, the CEO of DS Smith, who actually went on BBC News about 3 weeks ago, I think. And he said, this is the issue. It is, as consumers, we're sitting on the product that we need to put back into the system. Because this is the scary thing, is from when you get a box at Waitrose and it gets recycled, within 14 days, that will be back into a box.
Well, I was chatting to a guy yesterday. I said, what do you do with your waste, your cardboard waste? He said, I burn it. I use it for bonfire. I said, don't do that. No. It's just the last thing you want to do with cardboard waste. Get it back in the system.
Exactly.
Crazy.
So I reckon within 2 to 3 months, I think it will start to sort itself out. I think historically, then, if we look back to the end of last year, the final quarter, there was obviously a massive uptick in November, and I'm not sure why it happened specifically in November, but there was a massive lift from e-commerce pack requirements, and then obviously then Brexit. So there was a lot of people who I think were putting in sort of duplicate orders, if you see what I mean, to ensure that they were going to get their products. So some industry people call them ghost orders. So you're ordering it to make sure that you can get the raw materials. And so I think probably within the next 2 to 3 months, I think things will start to settle down and get back to normal. But it's been a frantic time. I mean, I was talking to my dad about it, and he's been reporting on the industry for 45 years, and he said, literally, you've got to go back between 30 and 40 years to see this sort of scenario happening. So it's been that long, since we've been in this perfect storm.
So what was happening 30, 40 years ago? Remind me.
No, 30 to 40 years ago is when we had the last sort of massive paper crisis, that we just couldn't get our hands on enough packaging and paper. But bizarre. So
predictions, let's say 3 main predictions for the next 5 years. What are we going to see? What are the main things that we're likely to see in the corrugated and carton packaging industry?
I think the adoption of digital or digitalization, so not just digital printing, but I think the rollout of systems that will help streamline plants. So that's the first one, digitalization. Automation, I think we're going to see a lot of development in that side. And of course, I think also the other interesting thing is obviously order, run lengths are coming down. Okay, they've been coming down for years, but gone are the days of, oh, print me 1 million boxes. I think those days are far behind us, because the brands have become very smart with, obviously they have to be able to react to what's going on in the news. So social media is helping drive personalization or branding that is responding to something that is happening at that moment. And so I think agility is going to be one thing that the industry will need to grapple with. The ability to be able to turn a job around, from a new pack design inside of 7 days. I think that's certainly going to be coming forward.
And lastly, what are you reading at the moment? I always like to ask people that question. What's the book on the go at the mo?
So I've actually just started reading the book on David Miller, cyclist. Very, very troubled individual, but hugely talented on the bike. I'm afraid I'm a little bit of a bore when it comes to books. I don't read a lot of fiction. I like reading about people. And because of my passion, if you looked at my my library at the moment, it's full of biographies, on from Lance Armstrong through to Mark Cavendish, and then even in the racing world, AP McCoy, Frankie Dettori, Sir Henry Cecil. So I love reading information and books about sports personalities, because I always find it fascinating as to what makes them tick. At what stage in your life is it that you go, yeah, I want to sit on a bike and pedal for 6 hours at a time, and actually make a living from it. Yeah, fascinating. I love reading about sportsmen.
And the book that's had the most influence on you in your life?
That's an interesting one. I read a fascinating book about Field Marshal Montgomery. So obviously I've got a military background, both sides of my family, very heavily involved in the forces. And yeah, I found it really quite shocking the way that Montgomery was portrayed. But obviously there were, there's always two sides to the story. He was a great tactician, but he wasn't a very good diplomat. It was very much ruled by, his authority. And yeah, I think he was a hugely misunderstood person, but huge amounts of respect. And yeah, so, and it turns out he's buried at the church where I was christened. So, there's even a nice tie in there.
Is that Salisbury? Is it?
No, in Binsted near Alton in Hampshire.
Right. My family are from Hampshire, funny enough. A bit further south, just outside Chichester.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Emsworth, Prinstead, Huntingdon, around there.
Yeah, very nice.
Lovely part of the world. Yeah. And if you're into sailing, that's the place to be.
Absolutely.
But Dan, thank you so much for your time and giving us an insight into your world. It's really appreciated. Thank you.
Well, it's been great to catch up with you, and hopefully we haven't bored the audience to tears. But there's a lot going on, and I'm truly passionate about the paper-based packaging industry. We've got such a good story to tell, and I find it sometimes frustrating that the industry doesn't shout loud enough.
No,
and the whole raging debate between single-use plastics and the ethics behind plastics and flexibles, etc. And listen, they do a great job. I mean, every pack is fit for purpose. But yeah, I just think that we could do more in our industry to promote the sort of environmental benefits. Because I think the generation that's coming through, my kids, probably because I bore them to tears, but I think the kids genuinely understand today the importance of what's going on with paper-based packaging. I think David Attenborough has certainly helped put put us back at the top of the agenda. These awful images of sea turtles with plastic things around their necks is not what we need to see. So I think it's up to us as an industry, as a voice, to say, let's crack on and show the benefits of everything that we do and why we do it.
It's actually thanks to the corrugated industry that I got a passion for computers.
Okay, tell me more.
Well, I was when I was at Finboard, and we were trying to communicate the advantages of semi-chem fluting over waste-based fluting, which is made of a virgin fibre. I know you know this, but some of the audience won't. Of course, the industry has moved almost entirely to waste-based fluting. But the idea is this computer program, which was run on MS-DOS on an old Toshiba laptop. I used to take that into clients and put in the data of their various different liners of fluting and predict the outcome of edge crush and box compression strength. And then you could show on the screen the advantages of using less grammage, but a much better quality product. And then you could then sort of rationalize one versus the other. And that's what got me into computers.
So back in the days with Mike Clark.
Mike Clark. Yeah, thanks to Mike. It's all thanks to Mike Clark, actually.
Yeah.
I haven't had contact with Mike Clark for donkeys. I hope he's well.
Yeah, and Nigel Fulton and
Dixie.
all those old names that used to sort of hang out with my dad, and so it's great, knowing that these names are still there and still around. But yes, I think Mike does quite a lot of activity with the stationers up in London. So he gets heavily involved with trying to recruit new people or new members into the stationers.
Because he got very much involved with the PEFC Mark. That was the last time I had contact with him. But yeah, he inspired. In fact, he was the reason I joined Finboard.